everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. I will keep this intro short. My dear cat Prembley is not feeling great. I want to go spend some time with him, and yeah. But got a great episode for you today. This is Jim Zub, and if you don't know who Jim is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Eisner and Harvey Award-nominated comics creator Jim Zub began his comics career making webcomics starting in the early aughts. But it was with his Image book Skull Kickers that allowed him to break through to a wider audience. Since then, he's written other creator-owned work for Image like Wayward and Glitter Bomb, as well as numerous books for DC and Marvel, including, most notably, The Avengers and Thunderbolts. Speaking of Thunderbolts, Jim is currently writing the latest series of that, as well as a Murder World miniseries, a Conan series for Titan Comics, and much, much more. What can I say about Jim besides he's a great dude and a great guest, fully willing to go on the journey that I like going on the show, open to talking about things, and has a lot of interesting things to say. What more could you ask for, my dear friends? By the way, if this is your first time listening to Beginnings, thank you for checking out the show. You know what I like to do here in the intro very quickly is a little recommended if you like. So say you're here because Jim is a comics creator. You want to hear other interviews with comics people. I've talked to dozens of cool people. Just recently, Kieran Gillen, but also, everyone from Chris Claremont to Jim Starlin to Kelly Thompson. So just dive into the back catalog. They're all there on Spotify. For some reason, Spotify is the entire back catalog. The other ones don't. I don't know why. Anyway, what else before I go hang out with Prem? I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. My philosophy Substack is free and at theslowdystopia.substack.com. I got music from my old Casio pop band at andybeckerman.bandcamp.com. If you like music with tons of Casios and tons of melodies, check it out. And coming up on the show, you should subscribe. You should subscribe because I've got a lot of amazing episodes coming up, including Emma Pates, who you might know as Martha on Pennyworth. She was wonderful to talk to. Damian Abraham from Fucked Up. Very cool talk. And next week is Terry Winter, I think. Terry was a Sopranos writer. He created Boardwalk Empire, the new Tulsa King show. Very cool guy. Love talking to him. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Jim. Just from talking for like 3 minutes, you seem emotionally healthy. You seem like someone...
You seem emotionally healthy. That's a good first impression I like to leave on people. I appreciate that.
It is, just because I started in with my anxiety, just because like from staring at myself on this thing and being like, oh God, I got to lose a little weight. But you're just like, oh, you should be kind to yourself. And I'm like, oh, yeah. That seems like a well-balanced person to say that to a stranger effectively.
Right.
I assume you say that to yourself. I should be kind to myself.
I try to. I mean, obviously we're our own worst critics most of the time, but that's the nature of the creative arts, I guess. Or maybe just humanity in general.
Do you feel like, especially in comics, do you feel like you're your worst critic when I see like the shit people say
No,
online?
there's critics out there who'll just tear you down for anything. So no, I don't. I'm not my worst critic in comics. No, there are people who get really they'll get caught up on one panel of dialogue or one bit of continuity, and they'll decide that they hate everything you've ever done. So I don't think I'm that bad. I don't think I'm that harsh.
Have you ever thought about that? Like, what is the, like, obviously, if you read comics, like, continuity is important. Like, you want the writer to have thought
if you
through.
write, you're talking specifically about superhero comics and shared universes, of course.
Or anything, like whatever,
Sure.
like even something you've written on your creator owned, where
Sure.
like when I read something, I understand the business aspects and I understand just the human aspects, where it's just like,
Right.
yeah, you might lose that. But I don't know if I've ever understood the mentality of someone who like, well, in Spider-Man 161 in 1967, he said this, and now in 2008, he said this thing.
I think any kind of serialized storytelling, you have the danger of both forgetting things and making mistakes, and also you have the need, to want to kind of freeze things or put it in amber, that nothing should change or nothing should ever evolve, right? And I think that the extremes on any of that are dangerous, right? You don't want to lose the core of these characters and make, what makes them so special, but equally you can't just trap them in that moment for all time. You have to evolve, you have to try things, you have to experiment. And especially when you're talking about these shared universes and you're talking about these continuities and these characters, and they're beloved for good reasons. Some of the most memorable, most exciting stories are the ones that do kind of shake things up and make big swings. And so you have to also be willing to take risks and know that sometimes those risks will fail. And that's part of your job, is to try and generate those ideas, or to sort of come at things from different angles and say, what can we do with this character? Or how can we explore aspects of this character in a different way, or put them, put these adventurous characters under the wheels and see what they show us by, the amount of pressure that we can exert upon them. But the nature also of serialized storytelling is that the audience is reading it chapter by chapter, issue by issue, in most cases. And so you're getting this real-time feedback when you're ending issues on really low points, or you're really putting these characters through the business in a way that on most films, barring a few examples like your Infinity War and Endgame or something, you're generally not having a cliffhanger ending to a movie. You're getting the complete 2-hour, 3-hour, even 4-hour experience, and then it's done, and you've gone through the emotional loss and then, victory, or the complete story. Whereas here, there could be a month between chapters, and there might be 5 or 6 chapters, and you're teasing out that entire thing. Like, literally, one of the books I'm working on right now is called Unbreakable Red Sonja, and it's the famous fantasy character. And at the heart of the story is a mystery, and we're turning the cards pretty slowly, so the mystery is not going to be revealed until issues 3 and 4 out of 5. So issue 2 comes out, and we get some reviews where people are like, "I don't know why these things are happening," and it's like, yeah, that's a mystery. But if they're not entertained enough to continue on issue 3, that's part of my fault as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've got to somehow give them enough to hold on to, but also try and still keep my mystery intact. Do you know what I mean? And know that at some point it's going to be collected in a complete book, and then you'll get that complete reading experience, and it'll function. So it's a unique kind of thing of the medium, where in a movie, if I have a mystery, generally speaking, you're not going to walk out midway through and go, well, that made no sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that's one of the weird aspects of it,
Yeah.
And you can have that sort of thing in any kind of serialized entertainment. In television, people can sort of go, I don't care. And then they're like, well, if you watch after episode 6, it gets really good or something,
Well, that I don't like the hope watch. I do hope watch, but I try not to, because then
if someone I really trust, as a, my brother would do this. He would tell me about, we both love Japanese animation stuff, and he would tell me, he goes, oh, the show gets really good. He's like, 30 episodes in, you're really going to love it. And I'm like, that's 15 hours, man. Like, I got other things I got to do. I don't know about that.
Yeah, just wait till Bleach season 16.
Yeah, exactly. It really comes together,
I guess the thing that, like, I can empathize with that mentality.
Sure.
I could understand someone getting angry with continuity that is emotionally dead, I guess, is what I'm
right.
I'm trying to understand, because you are, again, from 5 minutes of conversation, you seem emotionally resilient. You seem well as a person.
I've been in this business for a while. I've seen some stuff.
And I know also, as someone who creates things, that, like, it with the people criticizing it can be
Well, no one likes it.
Painful.
No one likes to hear criticism, right? It's not like this. I don't think comics are some unique creative medium where it's like, man, movie people sure love being criticized, and musicians,
Right.
that's their favorite thing. They love getting just absolutely dumped on. You're like, nah. Every creative artist. I one of the things I'll talk about on social media is I think comics has obviously unique qualities to it, and comics as a medium has unique qualities to it, and comics as a reading process, and as a writing process, and as a creating process and collaborative process. Yes, there's all sorts of creative and interesting and unique things about it, but sometimes I find that the industry can kind of pin their wrist to their forehead, and they can be like, oh, comics, we're so unique, oh, we're so different, oh, we're so put upon, oh, we're so beleaguered. And I find that a little bit frustrating, because I'm like, talk to someone in theater, talk to someone in music, talk to someone in graphic design, talk to anyone in the creative arts, and the vast majority of your complaints are universal. The creative arts are not treated well, right? If they don't pay enough,
Sure.
they don't have stability, they're not appreciated, and yet we all rely on them constantly for escapism and entertainment and insight and enrichment. And so I think that is a universal problem, and comics wants to hold itself up and go, but we are the most put upon, the most whatever. And I'm like, not really. Ask a someone who's a theater major how their job hunt's going. And
yeah, okay, but okay, I'm gonna say this though, but if you write a character that has like a 30-year history, this is the difference between TV writing, unless you're writing on like, I don't know what it would be, like a soap opera, Doctor Who, something, I suppose, where you have this kind of like long continuity. There is continuity that like there's emotional continuity, or the character's traits. Okay. And I can understand someone saying something if like you decide to just change someone's personality just because it suits the story. And that's one thing. But then there's the other kind of, I would say, like, the mathematical person, the analytic person who is just like, well, this contradicts this panel over here. And that's that kind of like, that's the kind of, look, this is a theory I've had on the show. I am wavering on this theory. I say people, creative people specifically, but anyone can have a void inside them. And one of the reasons you do this in public, right? You could just write on your own and just save it at Emily Dickinson style, right? Save it in a little journal somewhere. But you don't. You do this in public where people can respond to the work. I some of it I would assume is out of like a desire to connect with people, but some of it is because you just have this, again, theory. Some people are like, I don't have a void inside me, right? Okay, so those are them. And it is it's when someone will criticize something that's like, well, this panel contradicts something from 30 years ago, like a thing that they said that Peter Parker said again, whatever. That Nightcrawler said, it doesn't matter. And that's the stuff that like irks me. That like gets sucked into the void.
Absolutely.
And then it just like sticks around, and I'm like angry.
But it's interesting too, because I waver on some of this stuff too, because I think for the majority of us who dig deep into this medium, and specifically stuff like superhero comics, we have all had those moments where we love the specificity of the thing, or we love the depth and the breadth of something like the Marvel or the DC universe. And so when someone gets it right, that ticks a little box in our brain. And when someone gets it wrong, the X or whatever, and so I get it. And one of the things I try to do, and it's hard, especially if someone's criticizing your work, is you have to understand that that element of fandom comes from a place generally of passion and engagement, right? They wouldn't ask you these things, or they wouldn't know these details about these characters and these worlds and these, old continuity, if they weren't obsessed with it in a way, because it has been so compelling, and has been so fulfilling, and has been so engaging to them in the past. And so you are taking a thing that they hold very near and dear to their heart, and you've got the baton right now with these characters, and you're running the marathon with those characters right now. And so you have to both simultaneously it's not even both. There's multiple layers to it. You want to please yourself and your story. You want to please, your editor and the publisher. You want it to sell well. You want the retailer to be happy, and you want the reader to be satisfied, but also surprised and also taken on a journey dramatically. That's a whole lot of stuff to be carrying with you on the latest chapter of character with 30, 40, 50-year history, right? And it has to simultaneously feel appropriate to the legacy of that character, but not be repetitious and boring. Same thing we've seen 100 times before. Or, why are you doing this? You're ruining everything. They would never do that. And you've got those two extremes that you're trying to find somewhere. You're trying to dramatically engage these characters in a medium where, let's be 100% honest, we all know the vast majority of the time it's all going to work out in the end. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're not really going to kill the hero. You're not really going to destroy the world. So how am I keeping you engaged? How am I keeping you on board chapter to chapter, issue to issue, scene by scene? You know what I mean? And so you're trying to do all that, make it seem really straightforward and effortless. And you're doing it in a medium where most people are like, oh, it's childish. It doesn't matter. It's stupid. It's toys. It's kid stuff. It's whatever.
Oh, really? Because, okay, look. Let me give you an example. Secret Invasion from, I forget how many years ago, 10, 12 years ago. Okay. It irked me a little bit that they didn't mention.
This is really wild. We're just like inserting ourselves into this interview. We're like diving deep into these funky questions. This is interesting.
There was an Uncanny X-Men story from right before Chris Claremont left, where like they're in space and some Skrulls take over their body and Gambit figures it out. All right. That doesn't get mentioned in Secret Invasion. You would think that was like a precursor or something that doesn't get mentioned. I didn't go online. It kind of like bumped me a little bit, but I'm like, I didn't go online. I forget who wrote Secret Invasion. I didn't go online and like scream at the person.
Brian Michael Bendis.
I didn't go on and yell at Brian Michael Bendis. I like him as a writer. So I'm like, I didn't go on. But there are people who probably would. There are people who like do that. But it seems like the stuff that that's not the stuff that irks you. It's more of the people that that treat comics as a like I'm okay. A, do you have a void? B, what are the things that get stuck in it if you do have one?
And I, don't get me wrong, I have my moments where people will. So I'll give you an example of something that eventually kind of broke through my I can't talk about this anymore kind of barrier. So I was one of the writers on these two different Avengers Weekly stories, these events. The first one was called No Surrender. The second one was called No Road Home. And in No Road Home, we had this big narrative device that we ended the story with, where I came up with this concept of above the reality of the Marvel Universe, the higher levels, above the gods, above all the things, that there's something called the House of Ideas, because that was what, Stan used to call Marvel. Yeah. And I thought it was this fun metaphysical idea. And Al Ewing and Mark Waid, who I worked with on the story, really liked it. And we end up having the Vision, who was both traditionally and in continuity connected to the Human Torch, the original Marvel Comics #1 character. He is able to engage the House of Ideas, and he defeats the big bad using sort of this ultimate kind of narrative energy. It's very meta. It's very kooky. It's very weird. Some readers absolutely loved it as this nod to the comics medium, and other people said, oh, it just, takes all the air out of the conflict or whatever. Whether you liked it or you didn't like it, that's not the point. We did it in the story, and it's a thing that we made. Now, it's the kind of narrative device you can't pull out every story. You got to really carefully time these things. Otherwise, it becomes a really bad, literary device that's going to get abused and overutilized. And we did it as a fun traditional thing. It was Marvel's 80th anniversary. It was something that I'd been thinking about for years, and it seemed like the right place to do it. To this day, once or twice a week, I get asked by people
really?
about whether or not a character is powerful enough to engage the House of Ideas, is connected to the House of Ideas, where the hierarchy of they are in where they fit in the Marvel universe, whether or not it would contain, say,
an adult asks you.
Oh, multiple adults. They ask me about certain characters, whether their power is associated with the House of Ideas. They ask me whether or not things like the licensed comics that Marvel did in the 70s, like 2001, A Space Odyssey or Planet of the Apes comics, whether those would be considered part of the House of Ideas or they're outside of that continuity. They ask me questions about whether or not the Scarlet Witch's powers are associated with House of Ideas, because in the back of one of the issues, our assistant editor had scribbled a bunch of notes as we were jamming story ideas, because we did the story development on No Road Home in person at the Marvel offices. And she just took one of her note pages and scanned it as like back matter, as like a fun little, this is what's like when you're jamming story ideas with Mark and Al and Jim. And on that list, there was a question that says, are Wanda's powers associated with the House of Ideas? And it was just like a brainstorming thing we had at the story session.
Do you blue sky just like a TV writer's
Yeah,
writer?
Tons of stuff. And so all of a sudden, because that's now, the readers saw it in the back matter, people were like, oh, that's in continuity. The Scarlet Witch is the most powerful character in the Marvel Universe. Jim said it, this is real. And I'm like, no, it's never been done in a story. That was just blue sky stuff, brainstorming. And other fans will, to their dying breath, will tell you now it's in continuity. Scarlet Witch is the most powerful character in the Marvel Universe. And Jim really likes the Scarlet Witch. So therefore, this is set. And so they asked me over and over and over and over again about the House of Ideas. And, how does it work? And what are the things of it? Like, just let's take all the magic of this fun meta thing that we did and let's just scrape it to the bone and try and put numbers on it. Like, if we can say from rank 1 to 10, and it's like, you missed something. You missed the grandeur and the joy and the fun of what we were trying to do there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I don't want to tell anyone not to enjoy the book or not to be entertained. On the one hand, we made something that utterly fascinates these readers and they really deeply want to know more. And that's a great bit of entertainment. If you leave people wanting more, what more could you ask for as a creator? They want me to do more with the House of Ideas. And yet, you know what I mean? And so it's that weird part of the business where you're like, I'm not here to tell a fan not to enjoy, not to engage, not to be excited. Mm-hmm. But when you get asked the same kinds of questions dozens of times, and you literally keep saying the same thing, which is, I don't even own this thing. It's Marvel's. Another writer could come along and they could say, oh, the House of Ideas is nothing. And a character just crumples it up, puts it in their pocket. They could vaporize it. They could never bring it up again. They could completely remake it and make it a real house that's on a random street and people can just walk up and grab stuff anytime. Mm-hmm. They could make it powerful. They could make it weak. They could use the name for something else. And it's completely out of my control. Uh-huh. I don't own it. I don't control it. I have no idea if it'll ever be used again. But you can only say that so many times before you feel like you're just a broken record. You know what I mean? And you're just sort of like, and I don't want to be that the story speaks for itself. Like, I want to be able to engage the fandom and I want to be able to talk to them about this stuff. But every so often you're just sort of like, I don't have an answer for you guys. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, I'm going to call these people the spreadsheet people because they want to
sure.
There's nothing wrong. By the way, there's nothing wrong with engaging with art in this way.
I was one of those people when I was growing up, and I don't know if I would have.
That's what I wanted to ask. So
I don't know if I would have had. Okay, when I say one of those people, but more internal than external. But social media didn't exist, right? Like, if I had the chance and I could have talked to all my favorite creators, would I have been one of those people? Would I have been asking all those questions? My brother and I, so growing up, we were reading tons of comic books, and there were no trade paperbacks and collections of these things. That's not entirely true. Every so often they do one. There was like one for the Phoenix Saga, and there was one for like Longshot and weird random trade paperbacks in the 80s of books that were really expensive at the time or were collectible, and they weren't going to, they weren't getting reprinted like now. You couldn't access all the original comics. And so The only bits of history you had were when the characters talked about their history in the comics, and they would have the little asterisks and the caption that said, see issue, whatever. But I couldn't afford the back issues, like especially the really old ones. So it's like this weird telephone story where people are telling you what the past was like, and you just have to believe them because you can't access it directly, right?
It's just like
and
life.
So, well, when the official handbook of the Marvel Universe comes out, it's this comic, in this encyclopedic format where they've written all the histories and the entries of the characters, and they've organized them alphabetically, and they've cross-referenced them and appendix them and all that stuff. And it tells you in a way that's written like it's all been planned out. Like it wasn't dozens and dozens of writers throwing random crap against the wall that entertained them and entertained their readers for decades, right? It reads like, of course, this character's history is one linear, complete narrative story. And I loved it as a kid. I read those entries and it filled in all those holes of what I now knew about those characters. And because it was in that format and it had this austerity of this is the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, it also, to me, in my head as a kid, I think signaled this is the true and correct thing about these characters. And so if anything changes, why did you change that? Do you know what I mean?
It's almost a religious, almost a biblical quality.
Well, because it's the 80s, those characters have already gone through, in some cases, 20 years worth of changes. But because it was put down in this format, and that was the format that I read, and it was being told to me, then when they tell you the team lineup is this, and this character loves this character, and this character is married to that character, don't break it. You know what I mean? And so one of the things that I kind of had to do mentally, and this is many, many years later, when I started working on Marvel stuff, was realize that I wasn't, first of all, the characters had already gone through tons of changes since then. And second of all, part of my job is to change things, is to dramatically shake them up and to alter the status quo and to surprise and to, engage and entertain you. And as a reader, and so it's like, that's the job, right? Like, you can't keep it, you can't hold on to it, make it stand still. You're not going to be the same person you were when you were a kid, and the readers aren't going to be the same as when you were a kid. Figure out what works and what entertains and how to move the thing forward. Do you know what I mean? Without losing the heart of the character, without, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, whatever other analogy we want to use.
Wait, so where was this? This is in Canada, right? You live in Canada.
Yeah, I live in Toronto. Yeah. But just outside Toronto. Yeah. I grew up just outside Toronto, a little city called Oshawa. So it's like a blue collar city that's got a General Motor plant. And we had a surprising number of comic book shops in the 80s. It was like probably 3 comic book stores, a lot of nerdiness. I grew up very proto nerd, loved cartoons, loved comic books, fantasy. My brother loved fantasy and science fiction novels, but I loved more of the fantasy stuff. And then we got heavily involved in Dungeons and Dragons. And that was like a massive creative outlet for me because my brother is older. He's 4 years older than me, which isn't a big deal now. But when you're a kid, the difference between 7 and 8 years old and 11 and 12 years old is pretty massive. Do you know what I mean? In terms of who you are and the way you look at the world and how you want to interact with each other. And so we had troubles because we had fandom. We had things that we liked, but he also was drifting away and didn't want much to do with me, anymore. He had his own friends and his own kind of burgeoning social life. And I was still I wanted to be like him, And so Dungeons and Dragons was an amazing thing for us because first of all, it was creative and interactive, and we had to work together to play. We had to, he had to give me a chance to have my turn. And, if we did anything physical, we weren't like jocks or anything, but if we did anything physical, he was going to trounce me because he was 4 years older than me. Even video games and stuff, he had better hand-eye coordination at that age. But in the game, it was rolling the dice and coming up with, creative concepts and solutions and entertaining each other and everyone else at the table. And my ideas could be as good or better than anyone else's. And my dice rolls could be as good as anyone else's. And if I made everyone laugh at the table in that moment, I knew I was funny, I was entertaining, I was engaging, right? And that was like intense. That meant a lot to me, to be able to engage and entertain my cousins and my brother and everyone around me. Like, I wanted to be a little stand-up comedian. I wanted everyone to me to tell stories and let's make everyone laugh. And I don't mind being the clown as long as you're entertained, kind of thing, you know? Yeah.
Was that actually an ambition of yours? Did you want to go into performing at all?
For a while there, I thought, like, my uncle used to joke with me that I was going to be either a stand-up comedian or like a radio disc jockey or something, because I had he called the gift of gab. Like, I could just talk people's ear off and I could engage you and, you know, just constantly have this endless fountain of information, and my own excitement's pretty infectious, you know, and that's true to this degree as well. If I'm with friends and we're just like yammering up a storm, you know, every so often my wife will still kind of be like, whoa, slow down, let other people, you know, engage here. You're going a mile a minute, you know, if I'm really, really excited about stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of pushed you in one direction over the other?
I went through a kind of a classic sort of nerd model when my vision started to get really bad when I was in elementary school, and I ended up getting glasses, and they were quite thick. And then all the nerd kind of, you know, cliches took hold, and all the teasing and that sort of stuff. And so I kind of retreated into myself when I was in elementary school, heading into high school. And it was like, okay, I was still very socially engaged with my tight friend circle, but externally I was not as boisterous, to say the least. You know, my brother, when I was entering high school, he was in his final year of high school, and he, I think, tried to do some big social kind of, you know, tried to not be popular. I mean, I think he ran for like school, not class president or something, you know, something like that. And it didn't go very well. And that was just like a lesson to me of like, yeah, I'm not putting myself out there. I'm not doing that crap, you know, things like that. And so it wasn't until college that I kind of felt like I came into my own as a person and as a more confident, you know, person again. Because it was this weird kind of a social break where when I went off to college for the first time in years, I wasn't where I had been growing up, and I wasn't around the same people. So I had this sort of like a fresh start where I could decide how I wanted to present myself to other people. And this was going to be the new normal. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to be funny and engaging again, or I'm going to be confident, or I'm going to be whatever, and kind of make it real, if you will. And it took a little while to figure that out, but that kind of was really valuable to me.
Did you actually have that conscious thought, like, I'm going to remake myself and I'm going to try these things, and then either X, Y, or Z worked or didn't work, and you're like, okay,
some of it was subconscious, some of it was conscious. Like, I got involved with like a theater group and a gaming group of a whole bunch of these like just intense kind of club kids and theater kids in downtown Toronto. And they didn't know who the hell I was. And I showed up and I made some people laugh. And all of a sudden they thought I was really funny and charismatic or whatever. And I was like, haha, I fooled them. And then I realized it's like, well, I mean, I am, if they think I am and it's consistently happening, I'll just keep doing it. You know what I mean? Like, so it was that weird sort of a moment of, oh, okay, the theory is now the practice, you know, like, I'm going to do this. The weirdest moments was when I kind of reconnected with my high school friends, and they had certain social expectations of me. And then my new friends in Toronto had different social expectations of me, and they kind of came to a crashing collision. And I was just like, you know, what do these people want? Why? Just leave me alone, you know? Yeah, it's very weird. So,
was there any shame around liking comics or D&D or anything like that
when I was in high school and stuff? Oh yeah, big time. I mean, that's the height of the Satanic Panic. Well, not the height. I guess the height of the Satanic Panic is probably elementary school. My mom actually took away our D&D books for a little while because she had seen some talk show where they had interviewed a parent where they said their kid had become satanic thanks to D&D. And so she took our books away, and my brother and I freaked out. You know, and the problem is, you want to freak out and get your books back, but you don't want to freak out too hard because then they're like, oh, it's all true. You know what I mean? So we were trying to figure out how to convince her this wasn't, evil. And we ended up convincing my dad to try the game once. Like, he's the least nerdiest person you can imagine. He was a high school biology teacher, and he watches sports, and he's just like, blue collary kind of dad. It's great, obviously. But so we convinced him to sit down and play the game. And my brother, being my brother, who's very organized and he's not quite the spreadsheet guy, but he's getting there. And he'd say that too. He walked my dad. He didn't just, nowadays, if I'm introducing someone to D&D, I'll just give them a pre-generated character and I'll just get them into all the exciting stuff, because that's how you're going to hook someone. I don't know if you've ever played before, but it's like, it's tons of fun if you get momentum and roll these dice and cool stuff's going to happen. My brother doesn't know how to do this. He's like 12 or 13 years old. So he basically makes my dad walk through making a character, which takes just an inordinate, stupid amount of time to explain every precept of it and roll these dice and write these numbers and garbage. So my dad's bored to tears. It takes him like an hour to make a character. And then because it's old school first edition D&D, I think he plays for like 20, 30 minutes and his character's dead because he rolled badly. And so my dad just dies and we're laughing our heads off because it's hilarious, right? And so, no word of a lie, this really happens. He leaves and we're like, oh man, are they going to take our books away? And we cup our ears to the wall to my parents' bedroom to hear them talking. And my mom's like, well, is it satanic? And he says, Hermine, it's not satanic. It's just stupid. They sit around and they talk and they talk and they talk and they write down numbers and they roll dice and they write down numbers. And he goes, it's not causing any harm. Just give them the damn books back.
It's just math at that point.
So I always joked around that, on the cover of D&D, there should be a quote from my dad that just says, it's not satanic. It's just stupid. And I was like, ta-da, Dungeons and Dragons.
I know it was just your brother just walking him through it, but that's a brilliant way to show someone, like, just roll this dice 30 really times, is. And now you have to figure out where you want to put these, and now you have like how much gold or whatever. I can't remember. It's been a long time, but like, sure. You might as well be doing like algebra.
Yeah, we proved to him it was about as much fun as accounting. Yeah, it was great.
So, okay. I asked about the shame part because I was curious. Sure. I'm like, okay, in this story we're telling about your life, was it the glasses? Was it like having like Milhouse glasses that kind of like pushed you?
I think it was apart? A combination. It was all those things. It was all the cliches, right? You're very nerdy. You're terrified. You're going through puberty and all that kind of stuff. You don't know how to socialize and properly with other people. You've got a friend circle and you have these things that you understand that the general public's not super excited about, whether that's video games and tabletop role-playing games and comic books and cartoons. And so they're childish and they're not macho and they're not, whatever. And even if some of your friends liked some of the comic book stuff, and as we transition into the 90s and all the grim, gritty, image books and the whatever, some people, they get some mainstream kind of popularity, but it's still considered out of the mainstream for the most part, right? And so, there's all those cliches and there's all the teasing and there's all that kind of stuff. And you're just like, okay, no one understands this stuff. It's not something I'm going to brag about in a public way. I don't want to deal with this. There's no internet. There's no social media. I'm not going to find that tribe outside of this very tight-knit group of people that I'm growing up with. But I really like this and I'm really engaged with it. And even the comic book fandom would go through all those kind of phases. I started off, the first books I started collecting were like the G.I. Joe comic that Marvel did because I was growing up with the toys and with the cartoon.
Yeah,
and
Larry
then,
Hama.
Yeah. And then the Spider-Man, I started collecting Spider-Man because I always liked Spider-Man when I was a kid and I liked the old cartoon and I liked he would show up on the Electric Company and all this sort of stuff. And so I started collecting Amazing Spider-Man and it had this massive legacy. And I loved that I could buy new issues going forward and try and buy back issues and fill in a collection. I really liked that idea of it. And Spider-Man is every man and he's like me and he's nerdy and all the reasons why everyone loves Peter Parker, right? All the absolute cliche reasons for good reason. That's why I read it, and I loved it. And then I slowly fell out of those books as I got older. And we also hit the dearth of like kind of crappy Marvel, Clone Saga stuff. So I had no interest in it. Like once we hit those books, I was like, I'm not even enjoying this anymore. And I was already starting to get into other types of comics, more indie stuff, thanks to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, black and white stuff. And then more kind of indie comics, and then Vertigo books and Sandman. And no, I'm not just reading comics. I'm reading something that's got literary quality, and it's got deep emotional gothy feelings and, all this kind of stuff. Right. And so I'll go through that kind of Vertigo-y period. And then my brother, when he went off to University of Waterloo, he joined the Waterloo Science Fiction Club, and they ended up having a bunch of Japanese students who had come over because Waterloo had a really highly regarded computer engineering and computer programming courses, world, renowned. And they brought a bunch of their comics and animation with them. And so he rode into the burgeoning kind of anime fandom before it hit the mainstream. Like as Akira was becoming a big thing, he was already into anime and manga. He would bring stuff home. I was still in high school, and he was showing me these Japanese comics and Japanese cartoons that blew my friggin' mind, because they were like violent and dramatic and all kinds of genres that I had never seen before in comics, romantic comedies and historical dramas and sports mangas, all sorts of funky things. And the original, we're talking pre-World Wide Web. So this is what's called Usenet. So it's a series of like online BBSs, bulletin board services. I remember. And so people were translating Japanese manga. My brother would print it off on the big dot matrix printers with the accordion paper. And I would be looking at a Japanese original comic, and I'd be reading the script of what they were saying with all the notations. And this is a joke because this character's name is a pun for bread. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I'm just reading and super engaged with this weird, like now, not even regular comics, now like deep foreign comics. What is this stuff? Anime fandom I was getting into because it was different and it was funky. And my obsession with kind of animation really took hold all around that sort of stuff. I didn't know what I wanted to do through most of high school. I thought, I might do film or acting or stuff like that. I mean, acting seemed like a crazy choice because I didn't want to get up in front of people because I was terrified. But in my heart, it's like, maybe I could still be a stand-up comedian or something. Or when I was younger, I was like, I'll be a stage magician or some crazy crap. And then the art stuff kind of took hold, and I was doing really well in art classes. And I thought, well, maybe I could draw. I'd love to draw comics, but that's not going to be possible because.
Wait, can I stop you for a second? What was terrifying? Was this in college?
No, in high school.
This is high school. So you were still kind of introverted. You had not
big time.
You had not manufactured or gained your confidence back at this point.
Yeah, in middle school, like grade 5 and grade 6, I was like class clown. I could get up in front of people in a heartbeat. And then somewhere between grade 7 and grade 9, it was like, forget it. Like it's just not happening. Like I'm not going to put myself out there and let myself get embarrassed that way.
Did something happen or just naturally like?
I think it was the glasses. I think it was the teasing. I think it was fear. I think it was puberty. I think it was all those things that just sort of, kind of colliding at the same time. Right.
Oh, interesting.
And so I got obsessed with art, and I was doing lots of drawing. But I didn't know where I could put that. I didn't know how I could use that. And just randomly, I'm watching television, and on CBC, which is, one of the Canadian television stations, they had the big kind of national station. They had this there was this woman, her name was Adrienne Clarkson. Eventually she would go on to be the Governor General of Canada. But at the time she would just do these kind of like interviews, half-hour, I think, show interviewing famous Canadians in industries you never knew. Like, yes, there's the actors and the musicians and stuff, but she would interview like engineers who worked on NASA who were Canadian, or just like important scientists or, environmentalists or all sorts of things. And she had an episode all about these 3 or 4 different people who worked in the animation industry. And there was 2 of them that worked at Disney. And then there was one of the guys who pioneered all the special effects that you saw in Terminator 2 and eventually Jurassic Park. And they all of them went to this school just outside Toronto called Sheridan and took their animation program. And that there, just outside Toronto, there was this school that had this world-class quality animation program. And they were putting out these animators that were working at Disney and all these big companies. And that, Warner Brothers and DreamWorks and all these other companies were looking at this little Canadian college because they had this unique animation program that had started up in the late 70s or early 80s and had become this really cool creative ground. And I literally finished watching that thing and I went upstairs and I told my parents, I'm going to go to Sheridan for animation. And they were like, what? Like, I think this is what I want to do. Like, I want to be a Disney animator or whatever. I want to draw. I want to do this stuff. And they were like, okay, like, don't put all your eggs in that basket, but at least it's a goal, at least, you want to do stuff. And, it was that one of those weird feelings because the art courses that I was taking in high school, there weren't a ton of students in the art course. I think I was one of two guys. It was mostly women that were in those courses. And most of them, they weren't taking it seriously. It was just a credit they were taking. And so it was relatively easy to be whatever you want to call it, the best artist at your high school or one of the people who's known for doing art. You know what I mean? So there's this weird thing where you are sheltered. You have no idea what it really requires to do art as a professional. And so you just, well, of course this is going to happen. This is like destiny or whatever. I saw that television show and now I'm going to go to that school. And I applied and I put my portfolio in. And a friend of mine who was also really loves art and stuff, he put his portfolio in and neither of us got in. And we were just like, what? Like, how could this have possibly happened? Like, we both draw really good. And it's like, no, we don't. We don't know any of the actual core things that you need to know to be a quality artist. But in our heads, it was destiny. We were going to do this thing. So he ends up taking other art courses. I end up going to Humber, another college for film and multimedia. And while I'm there, I learn a ton about cinematography and photography.
Is that also around Toronto?
Yes, that's in Toronto, right in Toronto. So that year I lived with my aunt and uncle who live in Toronto. Well, they did at the time. And I learned a lot I learned sort of the basic tenets of script writing and, a bunch of stuff like that. And kind of broke out of my shell socially and got to reintroduce myself and figure out who and what I wanted to be, made a whole new group of friends and had gone through the majority of that school year and realized, first of all, the course that was at Humber, although it was fine, they were definitely, a lot of the instructors had been there for ages and the stuff they were teaching us was not current or relevant. And second of all, I really, really wanted to be an animator. I really wanted to be an artist. And I had kind of pissed away most of the year not drawing. And so for like a month, I super intensely work on my drawing again. And I put together a better portfolio and I reapply to Sheridan and I don't get in again. And my parents are like, this is a sign. You should just stick with film. You're doing really well. You're getting like straight A's in this program. And I'm like, yeah, but the program's not actually good. Like, I don't feel like I'm actually competitive.
Are they just having you make zoetropes or something?
Yeah. There was literally one instructor, one of our photography instructors. He was obsessed with this system where, I'm not making this up, we had slideshow, like the carousels, but there were like 6 carousels that were all computer controlled. And by computer, I mean like its own proprietary system. And you could time it to music. So these slides would flash on to music. I'm like, no, digital stuff exists already. This is crazy. Like, this is already, I can tell this is out of date the minute that we're learning it. This is madness, right? Like, this is not going to get me a job anywhere. This is a waste. And so, I need to do this art thing. And so I end up taking a year of kind of foundational art at Sheridan. I go into residence, make tons of friends there, get to see other people who are already in that program, get to, meet some of the instructors and like just get a better feel for what the kind of dedication it's going to require and stuff like that. And then I finally got into animation after that year of art foundation and started busting away. And the minute that I get into animation at, the school of my choice or whatever, Disney starts shutting down their 2D animation department and computer animation starts to sort of take hold. By the time I leave school, computer animation is the norm. And I've learned this archaic, almost useless, not useless. The skill set's really amazing, but like the process is totally different. I was in the last group at Sheridan that shot on film as the digital sort of revolution is underway.
This stuff is crazy sometimes. Like I want to be Bob and David. I want to be Mr. Show, right? And but I went to grad school first, and then I went to New York to do comedy. And by the time I got to New York, Sketch was dead. Sketch died in about 2008, 7, somewhere around there in New York. And I got there in I started doing comedy there in 2010 or so. And it was just, no one wanted to do Sketch anymore. It was just gone.
Yeah.
And it's,
you're on the wrong side of the divide. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is amazing to me sometimes all of the stuff just comes down to timing. Your existential stuff.
When I was on my, I've got to be a Disney animator, Aladdin came out and was a huge friggin' hit, right? And then Lion King comes out. It's one of the biggest movies of all time. And every film studio wants an animation studio. Warner Brothers starts their own feature animation studio. DreamWorks starts doing feature animation. They made that Final Fantasy 3D movie. Like there was, I think something like 6 or 7. Fox ended up grabbing the Don Bluth studio, and they were making their own feature film. So all these experienced animators in television suddenly got feature animation jobs. And so television needed hundreds and hundreds of people to fill in the holes. So it was like a feeding frenzy to get animation jobs. The year I was entering school, 2 years later, most of those studios had shut down, and all those people went back to television, and now the doors were closed. There was no more jobs in animation. And so it was like this crazy, we used to, like, people were thinking they were going to kind of get out of school and they were going to be directors. They were going to be, senior leads on productions within a couple years. It was bonkers, but that was just the divide. That was the way it ended up going. And so I did end up leaving school. A friend of mine at the time, he was trying to start his own animation studio, because that's the kind of thing that you come up with when you're in your 20s and you think you're invulnerable. And so we went off and tried to start an animation studio in Calgary, Alberta. And one of the justifications was, hey, there's no animation studios in Calgary, Alberta. We'll be the first. You're like, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe there's a reason why Calgary, Alberta is not like burgeoning at the seams with a need for an animation studio.
I don't know. Don't the oil companies need animations for their...
right? So, but you intrepidly go forth and you try and do a thing, and some successes, some failures, and learning a lot and trying to grow up and all that kind of stuff. And while I was out there trying to pay bills, I ended up guest lecturing at a school that was there, like a private art school or whatever. And they had an animation program, and I went by and I did some critique for them and talked about what we do at the studio. And within a few weeks, I was guest lecturing on a regular basis. And then within a couple months, I was teaching there. They offered me a teaching job. And I was like,
who reached out? Did you go to them and say, hey, if you ever need anyone to give a talk?
We went to them originally because we finally had like an actual contract, and we needed more warm bodies to do production. And so we were like, maybe we can get some students and do some internships over the summer, and we can get this production going. So we approached them initially. Yeah. And so I started teaching there, and all of a sudden I'm literally the same age as some of the students, and I'm teaching at this art college.
Yeah, I remember that.
And in some cases, I'm like, I would have a lesson coming up where I didn't feel like I had mastery of it. And so over the weekend, I would like just jam like crazy, trying to really fundamentally understand a thing and feel really confident on it so I could lecture it the following week. Or a student would ask me a question about drawing, and I would be like, that's a good question. We're going to cover that in an upcoming lecture. And then I would just go home and try and figure out what the hell I was going to tell them, but we did it, and I did it I taught there for a couple years. That ended up becoming my income for a little bit of time. And while I was there, and while I was even at the animation studio with some friends, I realized I wanted to tell stories. I got into this business, and one of the things I most thoroughly enjoy is telling stories, making stories. And at the time, I had moved on from regular reading of comics and manga and stuff like that. I didn't have any money. I couldn't afford to buy books. But what I did find was this burgeoning kind of new it wasn't even a new medium. It was a new delivery model. People were trying to put comics on the web. So there were all these web comics that were starting up in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. A lot of them were newspaper style strips. A lot of them were about video games and pop culture stuff that was relevant to people who had the technology to get on the internet in 1999 or 2000, you know? And I wanted to do a more narrative kind of comic story, but I didn't know how to get it published, and I didn't know anyone in the business. And I could figure out how to make a website. I could put some basic HTML together or copy it and paste it from other people, read a bunch of tutorials. And so I built a little website and I started putting up my own comic just because it gave me something creative to do in the evenings. Because I was teaching myself Photoshop and I was teaching myself HTML and I was doing a thing and putting it out there. And it was a way for me to just have a creative outlet that didn't hinge on other people's schedules or budgets or approval, you know?
Right. Well, where'd the determination, like you saying, like, you keep applying to Sheridan, or you keep, you know, you're like, well, I'm going to teach myself this, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to, you know, I'm going to put this comic online in this early, the early stages. Like, where's the determination or where's the confidence come from?
I probably early on, just not that classic naive, well, if they can do it, I can do it kind of thing. Or like, well, I got to do something, you know what I mean? Like that was a lot of kind of what I was thinking about, you know, and you reach out to a bunch of different people. I remember distinctively early on the Usenet and stuff like that, someone had put a list together of email addresses of professional comic book people, because not everyone had an email address early on. You know, that was not a thing. And people were like, you shouldn't send them messages, but these are their real email addresses. You're like, why are you posting these email addresses if no one's going to send them stuff, right? And I remember I drew some comic book pages because I was going through an existential crisis around, am I going to be a teacher? I'm not even a professional. Do you know what I mean? And I did some comic book pages and I sent them to a bunch of comic book pros on that list. And 2 people responded. Scott McDaniel responded and he was like, you know, these are still pretty raw, but like, keep at it. Like you've got a lot of moxie kind of thing. and Eric Larson was like, these are terrible. And he critiqued them and told me why they were bad. But it was great because someone responded to me and Larson's critique was dead on. Like he just drilled it. And I was like, oh, damn. Like, you know, and again, it's almost like that high school thing of in your head, you've got this, you protected. You've never been actually critiqued hard enough. You've never actually been told something's not good enough. Do you know what I mean? And so in some ways it lights a fire underneath you in a really good way. But yeah, I started making my own webcomic thing. And the difficulty there was it was almost the reverse. Because I had this animation training, I had a base level of how to draw. And most of the people that were doing comic strip stuff were very cartoony. You know, they grew up on whatever Garfield and you know, whatever, 100 different comic strips, The Far Side and stuff like that. And those are very appealing, very fun.
Funky
things.
Winkerbean.
Yeah, Funky Winkerbean. You know, you don't have to be like a drafts person to really draw that kind of style. And that's fine. That's not the point of those comic strips, right? The guy drawing Hagar the Horrible isn't, you know, going to be Leonardo da Vinci. That's not the point, right? But I started drawing this story that was a little bit more drawn, like full backgrounds and, you know, narrative and all this sort of stuff. And so early on, I got quite a bit of feedback that was like, oh, this is beautiful. And it's like, compared to most published comics, it was barely professional quality. But for stuff on the internet, it looked pretty friggin' good. And so I would get a lot of feedback and a lot of excitement. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just like, oh, I'm posting this thing up and my friends or family are responding to it. It's like random strangers are responding to it and telling me they liked it. And it was this very, you're 20 something introspective. It's weird because now you would look at it and you'd say, oh, it's this kind of manga-esque kind of emo thing. You know, this kid who doesn't know what he wants to be. It's like all your emotional stuff pouring out on the page. And then this girl literally comes plummeting out of the sky and she's a mystery woman. And where is she coming from? And how does she connect to everything? And he's on an adventure trying to save her life and all this sort of stuff. And it was I had a vague plot figured out, but from week to week, I would kind of change things up or what I felt like drawing. Or in some cases, I had seen a Photoshop tutorial and I was like, I'm going to try and incorporate that effect into my next page. I'm going to try and do a thing. You know what I mean? And people enjoyed it. And I posted those up for about 3 or 4 months. And then I was taking a break for Christmas and New Year's. And at the time, it's not like now where you have RSS feeds where it'll tell you when a website updates. Like if people stopped updating on a website, you just take it off your bookmarks and it was dead. No one would ever know you ever made a thing. And so I posted on the front page, my new page. And then there was like a news post that was like, hey, don't go anywhere. I've just taken a break for 2 weeks for the holidays. Please keep reading. I know sometimes the pages aren't as good as they should be, but I'm doing the best I can. Like just all this, fear and neuroses on the page or whatever. And about an hour after I posted that update, I got an email from Scott McCloud, the guy who wrote Understanding Comics.
Yeah.
And he was just an email out of the blue because I have my email address on the website. And he said, stop being so neurotic. You're doing a great job. Really looking forward to reading more. And I was like, oh my God, the Understanding Comics guy just emailed me. So I messaged him back and it was like, Mr. McCloud, I'm so sorry for being so hard on myself. I'm doing the best I can. It's like all the exact same stuff. And he was like, hey, why don't you give me a call? Here's my phone number. And I phoned him and we had an amazing conversation. And Scott was wonderful. Scott is wonderful. He's one of the most supportive people in the entire industry. He's just a fountain of knowledge and energy and exuberance. And one of the things that makes Scott really such a potent force in comics is that everyone who's making comics is worthy in his mind. He never treats a creator they've turned their things into a movie or they've sold millions of books. Yes, of course, he knows their importance in the broader publishing scheme. But if you are making comics and you are a creator, in his mind, that's all that matters. And he's excited and happy to talk to you,
But wait, let me ask you a question. You were not ashamed to pour your emotions out, right? Like this is what I think is interesting. I'm trying to figure out is that like you seem like regardless of like whether you felt shame or whether you became introverted and like got out of that or whatever, like it doesn't seem like you hid your emotions. And I'm asking this as someone who did grow up kind of repressed and did kind of like if like I was going to take a 2-week break or something like that, I would be like, be back in 2 weeks. And that would,
because it's the internet,
I'm hiding my emotion because
it's the internet and you don't know if people actually give a damn because all you have is text. All you have is a comment underneath a new post that you've done or a random email that drops into your inbox. So you're trying to, so much of social media is, hey, I'm here. Are you there? Like I'm alive. I'm still doing stuff. I'm good. I'm happy. I'm proud. I'm curating my visibility so that you think my life is better than it is, whatever it is. It's so much of this is just like little pings out in the darkness. Are you there? I'm here, kind of stuff. And I had moved away from home. I was on my own, in Alberta at the time. I'm teaching. And so I'm simultaneously someone who is supposed to be, to know what's going on, to be a mentor to these people who are my age or maybe just a few years younger than me. And I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Do you know what I mean? So it was like, it was this weird kind of moment where I'm like, but I know I want to be creative and I know I want to tell stories and I'm not currently doing that. Yeah. And so I'm going to try and do that. And also this is a constant in my life as well. And I think this is true of so many people. When you have a creative project, a personal project, it's hard to hold yourself to account. It's hard to hold yourself to a schedule. Yep. It's hard to hold yourself to put it out into the world because it's far easier to plan than to deliver, right? Because in your head, it's perfect. In your head, it's going to be beautiful and successful and funny and enriching and award-winning. And the minute you put it down on the paper, you see this malformed thing you just birthed out into the world and you see all the mistakes and the holes that are in it. And now you have to still A, be proud of it and B, fix it and make it better and raise it up and try and get it out there into the world. And I knew that by putting it online, maybe I didn't know consciously, but very quickly I figured out that by putting it online, I was holding myself to account. That if I said I was going to have 3 pages a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, which was the same update schedule as Penny Arcade, so that seemed reasonable, I guess. don't know why I picked that schedule. Then I had to do it because there were people watching. And I didn't want to let them down, and I didn't want to let myself down. One of the easiest ways for me to start a creative project is to, if a publisher comes to me or an editor and says, here's the deadline, well, that's the impetus. I got to do the thing because I want to finish the project because I want to get paid. And
I love a deadline.
But for a personal project on comics, I need to get an artist attached to the project, because the minute I have someone else that I've promised something to, my fear, guilt, responsibility kicks in, and now I'll actually do it, in ways where it's just free floating around until then.
Yes. So, okay. When you were growing up though, did you have did your parents validate your emotions? Your dad, you seem to say he was like what I'm going to call a jock teacher.
He wasn't a jock. Dad's, he is of a generation that is very repressed. And the same thing with my wife's father as well. They never talk about their emotions. Do you know what I mean? Or if it does, it seems to all kind of come gushing out at once. And then it just gets thrown back in the vault, and then whatever, he's unbelievably proud of you. And then, and it's not that he's never not proud of you. It's just, you can't show it too much because why would you do that, right? One of the things that he doesn't have a deep social network. It's family comes first, which is very much of that generation, right? And that's kind of the way that's always been. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She worked, I think, when I was unbelievably young, before I can remember, but by the time I have any memories, she's at home full time. So it's pretty classic, middle-aged, whatever, middle income kind of stuff, right? We didn't want for a ton, but we weren't they saved money very, very intensely, coupon clipping and all that kind of stuff, but we weren't we had some tight times, but there was never fear of we're going to lose the house, or the bills aren't going to get paid, or there's not going to be groceries or something.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like we went through any crazy, hardships in that sort of way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The worlds that I found in fiction, they always really spoke to me. I loved the idea of sword and sorcery stuff in particular. I think because there was these worlds that were unexplored. And the idea of, you can't just get on a phone, you can't just solve a problem. You're out there in the thick of it, or there's monsters and you've got a weapon and we're going to go find stuff in the darkness. That stuff was always really cool to me, Yeah. Yeah. It's weird because you can track so much of my writing and my narrative choices back to things I grew up on. I'm sure of everyone, it's the same, the movies that you watched and the experiences that you had, and that feeling of as you're figuring out in your head what your taste is, or what things speak to you, in very specific sort of ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking back as you're talking, I was because The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, that gripped me, and I was like, well, what was it about that? There was something. The story, it's
the books.
Yeah, it's a well told story. It's emotional, but there's also this moral clarity to it that the real world didn't have.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The fact that even within the fantastical of magic or whatever, there's a feeling of destiny or purpose or good versus evil. That's the kind of stuff that spoke to me. It's weird that I wasn't a huge Fellowship. I wasn't a huge Lord of the Rings guy. The Hobbit was good. Lord of the Rings kind of bored me. It was a little too much. But I always joke around that I'm not a high fantasy guy. I'm a low fantasy guy. Sure. I like Conan the Barbarian. I like pulpy, kind of morally ambiguous troublemakers far more than I like, you are the one true hero and here's the sword of heroism kind of crap. I love Conan the Barbarian, and I love Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. Any of that kind of gutted in the dark kind of, we're going to throw you in a hole and see if you can get out kind of stuff, because that's what D&D felt like to me. D&D was never about, even though I liked the Dragonlance novels and stuff like that because it was Dungeons and Dragons, that's still Heroes of Destiny high fantasy stuff. And when I played my games, it was always like goons. We were always just like idiots trying to earn our latest caper or trying to steal stuff from those ruins and get out there with our hides intact. That's what the game was. And so those were the stories I found most amusing.
Yeah.
I like the Indiana Jonesness of it and the pulpiness and the troublemaking kind of stuff more than now is the we're going to crown the new king kind of thing. It didn't speak to me the same way, and so that was the stuff that I really enjoyed about those kinds of stories. And you see that a lot in my storytelling as well. A lot of people thrust into stuff way beyond their ability, and not because they're the destined hero, but because they're not, and they're not going to do the thing that they're supposed to do, and they're not meant to be here, but they're here anyways. So here we go.
Yeah.
Totally.
I like both. It's just there's something like the world we live in is so morally ambiguous, and everyone is
sure,
that I just want, like, sometimes I want the escape of there being like, this person is a good person just because they are destined to be a good person, and that's that. And there's not gonna I like the moral certainty of slaying evil, but I don't think good guys are the only people that can slay evil, if that makes sense. So there are monsters, and monsters are bad, and we can put a sword in them, and that's good. But I might not be as good as you'd like me to be, and everyone else around me is not the paradigm or paragon that they should be. I find that really amusing to explore, Look, everything I write is completely morally ambiguous and like all over the place there. So I get that. I'm just like, like when I was a kid, I wanted there to be good and evil and not gray.
Yeah.
Instead of
but then again, because I grew up on like the Marvel superheroes, even when I was a kid, they were such, the Stan Lee and Roy Thomas and eventually Chris Claremont and, all those kind of writers that I really enjoyed. Their characters had feet of clay. Like they were always so emotionally messed up, and their relationships were messed up, and their lives were messed up. So that to me always felt like that's what heroes are supposed to be. They're not supposed to be the best of the best of the best. And the ones that seemed squeaky clean, those are suspect, Yeah.
And this is also like this, what I'm about to say is so completely reductive and like bad Freudian, but it's also like, it's kind of like your own story too, in a way, right?
A little bits of it. Sure. Right. Well, and we've all got imposter syndrome and that feeling you don't belong here, or you're not meant to be, or why me and not someone else. And there's a lot of that, I think, in the kinds of characters and the kinds of stories that I grew up on and read about, and that there's a randomness to life, but you'll make the best of it. The randomness, sometimes it turns in your direction, and other times it goes against you, stuff like that. Which isn't to say, I try and be very conscious of the fact that like I said, I didn't have like a really traumatic childhood. I didn't have like a really dark and difficult kind of process. It wasn't all handed to me on a silver platter by any means, but in the grand scheme of things, when I talk to people or I hear about the stuff they overcame, and I think to myself, man, I am very, very fortunate, for how it sort of went. And I start putting my stuff out on the internet, and to get that kind of positive response relatively quickly. And it wasn't even money, because no one knew how to make this into money at that point. It was just literally eyeballs and interest, and hey, I'm doing a thing and people are paying attention, which, later on, I didn't appreciate it. I had a few thousand readers, and one of the guys, he was trying to organize stuff. This guy, Joey Manley, he passed away a few years ago. He was trying to figure out how to make these webcomic networks, like bring people together in these sort of group, websites. And we were talking, and he said, any indie comic artist, who's been on the circuit for years, photocopying their own books and hand stapling and stuff, they would die to have the numbers that you have. And I was like, really? Because you always think grass is greener, on the other side, like real publishing, that's real comics. And what I'm doing is just stupid JPEGs on a website. Like, that's not real, And it's funny now that the reach and, we didn't realize that the internet was going to become the universal kind of communication system and commerce and entertainment vehicle that it was going to be. Half the discussions I felt like we had every time we got webcomic artists and creators together was, man, no one in real comics thinks we're real. You know, like these arguments where the National Cartoonist Society would not let webcomic artists join their guild, because even if the stuff looked great, even if it was as good as anything else in the newspaper, they were like, you guys are not filtered. You're just a bunch of hobbyists. And it took years before they would get them to recognize anything. And then eventually it turned when the newspaper kind of crashed, and then the comic strip section crashed. And all of a sudden, all these traditional cartoonists who had decades of experience couldn't figure out how the internet worked. And they were coming to the webcomic guys and they were like, what the hell? Like, how do I make this function? You know what I mean? Like, and we were all looking like, oh my God, everything has changed. Like, it's a complete generational shift, you know? And now we're weirdly more aware of the future, like what's going on, you know, that a webcomic can have millions of readers every week, and the traditional publishing industry is desperately trying to get your attention, you know, through the same vehicles, or willing to hire those people. That Kate Beaton is a New York Times best-selling, you know, graphic novelist, and Ryan North is, you know, a hit writer. And like, these are the people that we were just palling around and just being dorks with at these festivals when no one was paying attention, because why would you? You know, there's the guy that worked on superhero stuff. He's important. Who the hell are you? You know?
Well, okay. Last question, because we're right at the end of the show. Was that legitimacy ever important to you? I find that like, that's the thing that if you're resistant to needing that legitimacy, you're more of a full person.
I cannot properly parse it anymore, because I'm sure I've gone through phase. I'm now looking in the rearview mirror. So it'd be really easy for me to say, oh no, I never needed that legitimacy. And yet that's bull, you know, because like Scott McCloud emailing me, he's the Understanding Comics guy. He's a real comic scholar.
Right.
His attaboy did so much for my self-esteem. You know, he convinced me to go to San Diego Comic-Con in 2002, and he got me a professional badge. Like, I'm at the real Comic-Con talking to real creators. That meant a lot to me. It meant the world to me. It kept me going early on. Do you know what I mean? It made me want to do more of this stuff. And so, of course, there was a level of legitimacy matters, and the real publishing industry matters. And, you know, the first time I got to, when you work on these properties that the general public knows, there's a real potency to that. It's undeniable, right? If I say that I work in comics, it's already a conversation starter in any mixed company. Great, cool. Anything I've heard of, Avengers, Iron Man, Black Panther, Conan the Barbarian, Dungeons and Dragons, Samurai Jack, also a bunch of my own stuff, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, obviously the stuff that is my original creation is nearest and dearest to my heart, because it wouldn't exist without the efforts of me and my creative teams. But to the general public, when you tell them you wrote, you know, a bunch of news stories for the Winter Soldier, whoa, I'm the flagship writer of Conan the Barbarian. Oh my God, do you know Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever? Like that's, of course it has an effect on you. Of course it feels good. Do you know what I mean? Of course it is exciting. And to say that it's not is just a lie. I think, you know, Samuel L. Jackson had a great quote. They asked him in some interview, they said, you know, do you ever watch your own movies? And he laughed and he said, all the time. He says, any actor that says they don't watch their own movies is a liar. They covet them. They watch them. They absorb them. It's a giant ego trip every time you're on the screen, because that's one of the reasons why you do this stuff. Any actor who says, oh yeah, no, I don't even, you know, I barely watch it at the premiere. Like, I can't stand to watch myself. He's like, they're liars. They're liars. We're all narcissists. We all want to know. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I want to work on things that people recognize, but I have other creative aspirations, you know, and I want to create my own stories, and I want to have made things that I'm proud of. I'm not just here to deliver for an audience. Like, I need to be personally creatively satisfied as well. But to say that I don't want, like, that's crazy, you know. Of course the first time you write the word thwip in a sound effect of Spider-Man's, thing, and that's your job, and you have to tell you that Spider-Man's webbing something up, and you remember reading Spider-Man as a kid. It's the greatest feeling. It feels really amazing. It's super cool. You know what I mean? When someone tells you that you've written a character that you grew up on and you did it in a way that was respectful and exciting, and they can't wait to read more, and then they ask you to autograph a book. Yeah, it's very pleasing. It's very exciting. To say otherwise would be a damn lie. But there is a level where you sort of go, okay, they're really fans of Conan the Barbarian. They're really fans of the Avengers. I am ancillary to that at best. And in a best case scenario, they eventually become fans of my work and may follow me over to some other satellite project. Do you know what I mean? But first and foremost in their mind is that character, that franchise, that intellectual property. And you have to place your ego in check against that. Because otherwise, there's been so many people who thought they were the thing when it was never them. It was always the IP, right? And it's like, yes, you can be a crucial part of it, but you're still not. At the end of the day, the Marvel, Disney, whatever, that's the thing that people really love about it in most cases, Yeah.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, thank you for joining me today.
We covered quite a bit of ground, quite a fascinating little spin through there. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel? Good, bad?
I know it's always weird to talk about this stuff. In some good ways, it's interesting to sort of realize everyone's journey, I think creative journeys in the rearview mirror make sense because you see every step along the way. And then when you're riding it in the middle of it, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know why I've made these choices. And so it's always fascinating to analyze and to talk about this stuff, just as long as you don't become so absorbed in the past that you're not thinking about the future, Yeah.
At the very end, just destroying the very concept of this show.
No, that's not the case at all. I'm just kidding. I never want it to be like, I always, the cliche of like the high school jock who talks about their glory days, but I'm talking about what was, and and that was the story of Jim. And then nothing of note happened after that. You're like, no, like I'm super proud of the work I've been able to do. Like when my writing career finally kicked into gear and I finally started to get noticed for that stuff. If you wanted to put a sort of 2007, 2008, I finally started doing more. I got known for my writing. 2010, I finally had what you might call a breakout. So we're looking at somewhere between, I don't know, my first webcomic, Makeshift Miracle, was 2001. So it's been 20 years of this comic making career. But if you want to say I've been only taking it really seriously for about maybe 12 years. In those 12 years, I've written 8,000 pages of comics.
Whew.
And that's good. Like, I'm very proud of it, and that's good, but that's not like the number isn't as important as what they were. Do you know what I mean? And I try and tell my students, it's like, we're going to produce, because I teach now at Seneca College here in Toronto. I teach in their animation program, and I teach drawing, and I teach story development and stuff like that. And volume matters because you get better through practice.
Right.
But volume alone is not the answer. It's also about self-analysis and critique and strengthening your work at each stage and being able to analyze it and figure out where you want to go next. And so that's the fun part of the journey, is figuring out, okay, this is cool. Look at all this cool stuff we did. Celebrate those victories, mourn those losses, and then let's plan for what's going to be cool next year.
Seems like a nice place to end. Thank you so much.
I think so. My pleasure.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.